In this lesson, we'll look at how XML HTTP request actually works in the code from both the standards compliant viewpoint and the old Microsoft IE6 viewpoint, and the different states that the request can be in at different times and how that drives your code. If you're following along with the files, this is Chapter 303 script.html. For the first few examples, we're just going to be looking at the code instead of typing it in, just so we can develop an understanding of what's going on. And this is a very bare bones HTML page, but you can see that it links to a JavaScript file called script.js. We're going to be working with a file called colors.xml, and this colors.xml file simply contains a list of names and their hex values. Here's where the work is actually done in script.js. When the document's first loaded, window.onload is called, and that is set in this first line to call the makeRequest function. The one other thing we want to do when the script first loads is create a new variable. This variable is called XHR, and we're setting it to be false to start off. It's a global variable. It's going to be available everywhere. So the very first thing we have is the makeRequest function, because that's called when the page first loads. Scroll down a little bit. Here's our makeRequest function. What it's going to do is it says, if window.xml HTTP request exists. This is, does this browser know about this thing called XML HTTP request? If it does, we're going to make a new XML HTTP request object and use that same variable we had before called XHR. So from this point on, instead of referring to XML HTTP request, we can just say XHR. However, if the browser doesn't know about window.xhr, we need to check one more thing. Does this browser know about window.ActiveX What this is really saying is this browser Microsoft IE6? IE7 understands window.xml HTTP request. Firefox understands window.xml HTTP request. Safari does as well, but IE6 did not. IE6 needs to know if the window.ActiveX object exists. If it does, then we want to do something called try. Try is a simple way of saying, try this, and if it fails, it's going to look for something called catch. So in IE6, we're going to try and set XHR to be a new ActiveX object, and we're passing it a value of Microsoft.xml HTTP. If the web surfer is running IE6, this will create a new ActiveX object that is an XML HTTP request object. If there's a problem, say for instance, somebody has turned off ActiveX, they'll end up in this catch and XHR will not be set. So the very next thing we need to do is say if XHR. If we manage to set it here, or we were able to set it here, then XHR will be an XML HTTP request object. And so we can continue on that. If it worked, we're going to set onReadyStateChange to be showState. What this means is that anytime the state changes of this request, so it goes from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, we want to call the showState function, and that's down below. So we're saying whenever this happens, this is what we want to do. Then we open up our request. We want to do a get. So here's our open. Then we want to do a get. We want to call the file colors.xml, and we pass it true because we want to do an asynchronous call. We want stuff to happen without us having to sit and wait for it. And finally, for here, we do xhr.send, and that actually sends the request. So we open the request and then we send the request. And this sets the request in motion to the server. If we weren't able to properly set up an XHR object, we'll end up in this else. And what that does is it resets the update area, which was the area where we're setting messages in the initial HTML file, to be, sorry, but I couldn't create an XML HTTP request. And that's all there is to makeRequest. A lot of stuff going on there, but you'll be seeing a lot of this same stuff over and over and over again throughout the entire rest of this course. Finally, there is our showState function, because we want to see the state whenever it changes. So down here in showState, we're going to set a variable. Current message is whatever is currently in the update area. We don't want to overwrite what's currently there. So first we need to grab what's currently there. Now we're going to reset it, but we're going to start off with whatever was currently there in cur message, and then we're going to add on to it. I'm going to say the current state is xhr.readyState, and the status is xhr.status. So we'll see that xhr.readyState is changing because this is the function that gets called anytime readyState changes. Let's see how it works. We need to go back to script.html, and then we'll load this file into our browser. So here we are in Firefox. We're looking at localhost AJAX chapter 03/03/script.html. And you can see this changed pretty quickly. It started off with current state is 2, status is 200, then it's 3, then it's 4. Our final state of 4 with status of 200 means that everything loaded in properly, and status of 200 is okay. Next up, we want to see what actually happens to that request. What's actually the contents of it, because that's what we're going to want to do stuff with. That's in the next lesson.